All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing this magnificent epic fantasy novel, The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. Book number 5 in the Wheel of Time came out in 1993. Now, back in the day, I'm old enough that I was buying these when they were released back in the 90s. Like the first one I bought was like in 1989 or 1990, the first Wheel of Time book. And I've been collecting them ever since, buying them upon release day, reading them upon release day, anticipating the release day. Just one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. In fact, every Robert Jordan book that I've ever bought, I wrote down the bookstore in which I bought it on the front here. And this one was, I bought this one at BYU, Brigham Young University bookstore. When I was in college at BYU, I typically put a little X every time I read the book. I need to put a third X, by the way, because this is the third time I've read the book. And I just didn't realize how long it's been since I've read these books. Like, I read it in 93 when it first came out. I think I read it about 10 years later, which would have been around in the early 2000s. And now I'm reading it again. So it's been 20 years since I've read this, and I just forgot how magnificent this fantasy series is. And I'm just like, I was in awe. As I was reading this book, I was just in shock and awe about how much I was enjoying it, how epic it was, how much I loved Robert Jordan's prose and the characters and everything that was going on in it. It was just crazy. Let's talk about the book itself aesthetically, the cover, because you know I love graphic design and cover illustration. So the original first edition hardcover, which I have here, of course, has this great painting by Darrell K. Sweet. I like the characters on the back a little bit more than the characters on the front. The characters on the front are a little static and stiff, but you know, we know what's good. Very colorful artist, or very colorful artist. This artist paints a very colorful scene. Now, the paperback version, I've got the little paperback version here too. It's got the same thing going. So, but I wanted to compare and contrast this painting by Dan Dos Santos for The Fires of Heaven, for the re-release of these trade paperbacks. So which one do I like better? Okay, so I've always kind of enjoyed most of the Darrell K. Sweet Wheel of Time covers. Most. There are some horseshit stinkers, but mostly they're good. I really liked this one, but I also really like the Dan Dos Santos cover. That's really cool. Now here's the thing. I've actually interviewed Dan Dos Santos, the artist. If you want to, this is a couple years ago I did an interview with him. It's on the channel. If you want to find that interview, just type in my last name, Durfee, into your YouTube search bar, and then Dan Dos Santos' name into your YouTube search bar. Through some sort of pagan sorcery that I don't quite understand, that video interview will magically appear upon your television screen. You can do the same thing for the first 4 Wheel of Time books, which I've got right here. I've got the whole series. I have read and reviewed the first 4 Wheel of Time books on my channel. If you want to watch those reviews, you know how to find them. Anyway, let's get to the covers. I'm going to give this a tie. Normally, I prefer one or the other, but I think I like these both equally. This one's is more colorful, but the characters are in a stiff pose. This one is maybe less colorful, but I like the action pose with the little thingy there. And anyway, let's move on from the cover. There's a lot of cool things in this book still that we haven't talked about aesthetically, and that is in the hardcover, we get these great colorful maps. And then we get a lot of other maps inside, different maps. There's different maps of different cities. I won't show you all of them. We'll put that there. Anyway, let's talk about it. We talked about all the surface stuff. Now let's get into the nitty gritty. Um, yes, it was the opening of this book. Even though I called this a magnificent epic fantasy read, there was a few things. There's a few things in this book that I started noticing that became bigger problems for me in books in the rest of the series. And I'll tell you this. I'll just straight up. Even though I'm going to give this a magnificent, I will edit that out. Magnificent. Even though I will give this a tremendously high score, this is the Wheel of Time book where I started to notice some things that I didn't like, which was Robert Jordan adding a whole ton of characters and side quests and other things that I just wasn't that interested in. I mean, this is the book where I noticed that one of the main characters, Perrin, there's no sign of him in this book. You know, a whole 1,200-page novel, and one of our main characters is absent. It's like he ghosted us. Perrin ghosted us in this book. He's one of the main characters. And then I noticed in in future volumes, Robert Jordan tended to do that with one or two characters per book. You just wouldn't be in the book. That was a slight annoyance. It started here. Those little annoyances. Those are the only annoyances I had, though. They grew and grew as the series progressed, those annoyances. But for this book, they were just minor. But it's when I started to, it's when I started scratching my head like, why am I reading about all these different characters that I don't give a about? And but minor in this. Problem gets bigger in later books, as you know. Anyway, let's talk about how much I loved this book now. Well, it was a good day to die. One of my favorite lines in a fantasy book. And it comes towards the end of this book. And because this book, well, let's just talk about the ending first. Let's spoil the ending. We're not going to spoil the ending. You know, this book, it's action, drama, packed with intrigue, packed with world building, packed with great characters, some of my favorite characters in all of fantasy. And it's got one of the most unexpected, stunning, sad, moving endings to a fantasy novel that I would say I've ever read. You know, and as Lan would say, Lan is, for those of you that don't know, he's one of the characters in the book. As Lan would say, not only is he one of the characters in the book, he's probably the most badass character in the book, and probably one of my favorites. But as Lan would say, he's the toughest guy in the book, really. I mean, of all the characters in the book, he's the toughest. He's like the Jack Reacher of the Wheel of Time universe. And as he would say, as Lan would say, it was a good day to die. That's all I'm going to say about the ending. In the beginning, though, you know, Rand, our main character Rand, as this is a big, huge quest novel, where our characters are just kind of spread out all over doing different quests. But Rand is the main character, Rand al'Thor. He's the dragon reborn, or so everybody is starting to believe. Through the first 4 books, maybe that was in question. Maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it was Logain. Maybe it was Matt. Maybe it was Perrin. Maybe who knows who it was. But they're starting to narrow it down here that it's most definitely going to be Rand as the Dragon Reborn. Well, and tensions rise around this character because of this. Especially with the characters Rand and Moiraine. They have a lot of back and forth, a lot of little spats, a lot of little breakups and makeups, and they're not in a relationship. It's kind of like a mother-son, sort of a mentor. It's sort of like a Gandalf Frodo relationship, if you know what I mean. Like Moiraine is sort of the Gandalf of this universe. In other words, she's the magic user that is the wisdom of the magic user and has all the smarts to make sure that our other characters are keeping themselves on track, not going off into haunted cities. When she tells them, don't go off into the haunted city, and certainly don't touch any, daggers that might be magical and possess your soul. she's the one that gives them that advice that they always typically ignore. They'll just typically ignore that. And Rand ignores a lot of her advice. And so there's a lot of tension between the two. But we also start to understand that there's tension between not just Rand, but Rand and Egwene, Rand and Nynaeve, and I might be pronouncing all of these wrong, Rand and Avienda, Rand and Elaine, Rand and Min, Rand and everybody. There's tension between Rand and literally every other character in here, which is a great storytelling device, because now we've got this guy who's probably pretty powerful, who all of the characters want to tame that power, if you know what I mean, but he doesn't want to be tamed. He doesn't want to be he's kind of confused about what he wants himself. And just this is the tension that Robert Jordan builds so well in these books, is these characters, they don't always get along. And you've got to do that as a writer. You've got to, in every scene you create as a writer, you really do have to have your characters kind of at odds with each other, even if they're friends. There's got to be something, tension. And Robert Jordan does this so well. Probably one of the best in the fantasy genre, if not in literature altogether. So even though most of these characters that have tension with Rand, even though they're not even near him, sometimes they're thousands of miles away from him in this book, they're still consumed. Their thoughts are still just consumed with this guy. And because of this, we get to see the ruthlessness of a lot of these characters I've mentioned, like Elaine and Nynaeve and the Aes Sedai, all of them just, they just want this guy. And and that's kind of the thrust of the book, is these characters, along with the sword fights, action, magic, and things like that, which are relentless in this. I forgot that despite the fact that there's a lot of other characters that are sort of introduced in this book that I didn't really give a fuck about, or maybe they were introduced in previous books and I didn't give a fuck about them then, so now that they're still in this book, I still don't give a fuck about them. Even though there's a lot of that stuff going on, this was still, a book full of action and fantasy adventure that I absolutely enjoyed rereading so much that it might end up on my top 10 reads of the year at the end of the year when I do that. I was so mesmerized by this, and I was just like so swept up in being back into this world that it was just another magical experience. It's almost the first time I read it, like the first time you read a book, you want to capture that magic again. Well, don't read a book and then don't read it again for 30 years, and you might just recapture the magic. And it's got like even Matt's story, like the hardships that he kind of went through and the devastating choices that he had to make in the end, really hit me harder this third read through that I've done than any other time. And maybe it's because I vaguely remembered how this book ended, and I knew that we were going to get some scenes which were going to be heavy, and some of those scenes included Matt, and I was following this journey of these characters. Well, most of the characters. There were some that I was just like, give up about that. Anyway, but it's a minor quibble to a 10 out of 10 book. Like I said, a book that just had one of the greatest endings that I've ever read in a fantasy story. One of the endings that when I first read this back in 1993 literally shocked and stunned me. And took me a little bit to recover from, too. I mean, then I really super anticipated book number 6 because I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyway, 10 out of 10. I mean, fantasy books just literally almost don't get any better than this one. And I just, it's going to be in my, if I ever do a Wheel of Time book ranking where I rank all the books, I think this one's going to fit probably in my top 2 or 3.